I'll try and live up to half of that. That'll be fun. So yeah, I have quite an eclectic mix of things that I put together. To me, it all makes sense. I think to other people, it's quite a range of different things. I was quite intrigued to be asked to speak because I don't look at myself as being, because I'm what I call a commercial scientist. I don't really have much more to do peer reviews. What I have to do is to get real results. I need to get some ROI for some business somewhere to prove whatever model we've got is actually going to deliver something. And I actually love that because the speed at which I get to move is huge. And so I get to do quite a lot of fun things all the time. But my primary mission is actually around education, as Mary said. For me, education is in a real crisis, and I don't think that's such an unusual thing to say these days. So it's been in a crisis for quite a long time. And for me, I see that crisis as being probably the biggest problem we face as a society moving forward. I kind of have this very optimistic view on life that, we'll solve the energy crisis, we'll solve the health, we'll get all of that sorted. That's fine, but education is going backwards, not forwards, so that's more critical as far as I'm concerned. So if I'm into solving education, why on earth do I spend at least 80% of my time using neuroscience to help, companies sell shampoo? What on earth could be that linkage, right? So what I want to do is to give you a new perspective tonight on learning, on education, on the way we think, on the way we choose, and then maybe also paint you a different perspective about marketing and how it can be really deeply interesting as opposed to something that is usually seen as a bit surface. And it might explain why. So I'm going to start my story with the hero of the piece, which is the brain. I'm going to assume none of you are neuroscientists, so apologies to any neuroscientists in the room. You'll probably think he's glossing over this, he's glossing over that. I want to tell the big picture story of the brain and psychometrics and education. I don't necessarily want to get right into the details of it. So, your brain, between your ears, is the most powerful computer on the planet. It's not one computer, it's 100 billion, interconnected by 100 trillion connections. Right. So there are more connections in your head than there are in the internet, which is quite an interesting fact to think about. We learn by essentially losing connections, as if we hold them down. It's the survival of the fittest type of idea most of the time. That's the most significant part of learning. And if you actually do the calculations, I would say roughly there's about 1 trillion years worth of evolution that goes on between your ears during your lifetime. What I mean by that, if you look at the sort of generational genetic pathway, how long it takes to make a change into the next generation, and you look at the survival of the fittest model there, it's about 1 trillion years worth that's going on in your head, which is quite amazing. About 65% of your brain, in terms of its volume, is getting tied up with what I would say is about 1/4 millionth of the decisions that you're actually making in your life, and those will be the ones that you're conscious of, right? So it's quite interesting, this device that you have up there. And the other thing that it is I think it's very, very different from the way people look at it. So a lot of the time we talk about, particularly in AI, being in marketing, there's a lot of AI around, we look at pattern recognition. The brain is really a bit like an AI system, that what it does is recognize patterns. And of course it does, and I'm not denying it. But what I would say is that AI is based on quite low-level systems in the brain, whereas when you get to the top end, you get into something that I term meaning machines. What's the difference between patterns and meaning? And I might break into that a little bit tonight. But I think the key things I just want to bring out is just how parallel the brain is. It's billions of different processes. It's really, this idea that it's very much shaped by your experiences, the connections between neurons, use it or lose it kind of mentality. And then I want to contrast it with a completely different science, and that's psychometrics. Now, psychometrics goes back longer than most people think. At the end of the 19th century, when we started to see formalised psychometrics. And then what basically happened was, I would say, quite an innovative period for a time where psychologists would come up with an idea of something they felt they could measure about human beings, and they'd say, well, we think personality works like this, and then we could create a measure for it. And then if we can get that measure to be valid, as in it stays quite stable and it tells the difference between people, then it's a really important measure. And so it's proliferated all different sorts of psychometrics. And then we moved into a different phase, which is really interesting, which is a type of mathematics called factor analysis started to be applied. And it's done in discovering that although the psychologists over here had one idea and another one over there had a completely different idea, what they were ending up doing was measuring basically the same thing. And this kind of process went on and on and on until we ended up with basically only 6 psychometric measures. And it worked, right? IQ is the famous one, and there's only one real measure of that. Right? Despite the fact that there are tons of different ways of things that are measured, what you find is there's such a huge correlation between all of the different measurement types that for the average person, there is a single score that's coming out of that test. And on the other side, you have something called ocean metrics. That's your personality, of which there are 5 strands that everything correlates to. And whether we like Myers-Briggs or whatever, you may have your favourite flavour of psychometric. If you do get involved in any of that kind of thing, all of them tie back most rigorously to these 5 personality metrics. So that's really, in itself, I just want to underline how fascinating that is. To take an object that has billions of different units inside of it, trillions of connections, shaped by environmental processes, and to end up using factor analysis to sort of say, well, this basically aggregates into 6 numeric measurements. It's fascinating in and of itself. And then something else happened that made the story a little bit worse, because once you boxed intelligence into one metric, it would be all right if the next discovery was not, well, we could do some behavioural genetics on it. We could see what happens with twins that are separated at birth and see, well, how different is their IQ? What's the contribution of genes? What's the contribution of parents? What's the contribution of schools, if you like, or the non-shared environment? One of the toughest things I learned was parents don't really do anything in terms of your IQ, right? We spend all that time with our kids stimulating them, investing all this energy, and apparently to no effect. So you can knock that one on the head, which is quite interesting. But the more worrying thing is just how much of that result comes from our genetics. Now, it's a raging debate, so it's no point putting a single number on it, because if I put one number on it, someone will dispute it. But it's always upwards of 50%, and sometimes probably as high as 80%. And if you think that the variation in IQ is going to be all, that much of it is going to be coming from genetics, this then poses another kind of problem. The last factor with that, if I just focus on IQ for a second, is why am I focusing on that? Because in educational terms, if you look at the correlation between people's academic performance and their IQ, there is a very high correlation. So now we've got something that's really quite dark and difficult to look at. We're sending our kids to school, we're putting them through tests that essentially, a large part of the variation is coming from genetics. Right? What are we going to do with that? And I think what we did then was there was a bit of abandonment of psychometric science. Because, let's be honest, that's not the story we want to hear. But I want to tell this story a bit further, because this is something that intrigues me, that by abandoning science, in some ways, by pushing it to the side for ethical reasons, we actually got stuck and then committed far more atrocities on top of it than if you got curious. So, you really do have to think, okay, what does it mean when IQ is doing this in the classroom? And why is it that at an individual level, we kind of understand, we go, oh, the smart kids, that one over there, with this sort of individualistic level where people understand that, but at a societal level, we don't say that. It's all about hard work. You go to school, you work hard, everybody's got equal access to everything, right? It's an important part of the message. But the problem comes is, if the data is telling you something like this, what do you do? And the response, as I said, is to kind of what I call the ethical hallucination. That's to say, ethically I want this to be true, but now I'm going to just ignore the evidence the other way around. Now, don't get me wrong, people try very, very hard. If anyone knows about the next period of time that goes after the behavioural geneticist, you've got fantastic theories like multiple intelligence coming in, and then that being shown to correlate basically with IQ. You have many people who attempt to try to break this pattern, but they all get stuck. Now, for me, I think they all got stuck for a reason. And I call it religious rationalisation. So, certainly out of a Western culture, we have this belief that rational thought is the most sophisticated type of thought. It's endemic in the way we look at the world, right? Now, we can look at some academic theories around it. We can talk about how cognitive psychology is being structured, or more fashionably today, particularly if you're in marketing, you have the whole system 1, system 2 idea that is driven behind behavioural economics. Right? Now, actually, interestingly, that's not based on much science, but it's based on some of it. But it does show a really, really beautiful notion of how easily that took off, how everybody just accepted it and moved with it. And if you don't know System 1, System 2, it's a really simple idea that says most of your behaviour is controlled by a primitive system, System 1, which is your emotional brain. You're basically a caveman/cavewoman underneath, big person, and you do things over here for emotional reasons. They're very primitive. And then you have another system that's very sophisticated. It's the logical, rational centre of your brain. It thinks stuff out, but it basically has no power. It's a bit of a weird idea, but people take it on, and marketing is now being written on the basis that this is gospel truth. But it's religious rationalisation. Why does it exist? I think it exists for in some ways, quite benign reasons. We have the Industrial Revolution, and then we have the Digital Revolution. And actually, what that was about was simple systems getting industrialised. Right? It's simple physics. It's Newtonian physics. This pumps into that. It's predictable. They're always right answers. A follows B. Causation is simple. And as we learn how to build these simple systems to make some quite complicated machinery, it transformed our society. And so naturally, you elevate this form of thinking up, saying, this is the most amazing thing. But we are interestingly getting to some limits. So, for instance, how many people have got 4K TV? That's odd. Okay, I went to the shop, I could barely even buy something that wasn't a 4K TV, right? So, we've got to the point where 4K TV is pretty much off the rack. Of course, the resolution of your eyeballs is much more than 4K, right? So, how do we go any further with television? You might think I'm being trite, but you could look at the speed of processing, the number of videos that you can play at a time through a connection. I did a piece of work for EE that was around the LTEA, which is basically 5G and above, 5G plus connections. And we were streaming, it was like, well, now we can stream all this data, how do we demonstrate the power of this phone and the streaming? And so we powered 40 HD displays with different movies on it from YouTube at the same time as the phone. Of course, the question I asked, and we didn't answer, was why would you want a single phone to stream 40 movies, right? So it's interesting because we are getting, in many areas, to that limit. And so those are the limits of simplicity. But if we go beyond that, if we go to what's the next generation of stuff that's happening, which is, I don't mean next generation science, it's current science, but the next generation of things that's going to be revolutionary to us, we're starting to get into the complex world, right? What I would just term as a quantum chaotic universe, right? So, what do I mean by that? I'm just taking two ideas and putting them together to show you one thing. Quantum mechanics tells you can't know the state of any system to a complete level of certainty, right? We can't know absolutely what's in front of us. And chaos says that any small perturbation will amplify over time, and that's the whole, a butterfly in Tokyo moves a tornado in Kansas. Yeah? So those two ideas, if you think about it in complex system terms, means that you exist in a world that is permanently unpredictable. Right? Your decisions, most of the decisions you make are social decisions. You walk into a room, you decide to shake that person's hand or this person's hand. You've got to think about how you're going to start the conversation. Right? And you can say, well, that's trivial until such time as this is about, dating and who you're going to marry and how many kids you're going to have and what kind of job you're going to pick. And then suddenly you realise, should you speak to this person or that person? And in that job interview, Was this the right culture of the organisation you're going to join? Suddenly, all your big choices are tied up in a completely unpredictable network of events. And yet, I think most of you got here tonight without too much of a panic. You sat down, you knew what to do, you said hello to people, the whole world made sense, right? It made absolute sense to you. And yet, that's actually crazy. Because physics will tell you, you should all be panicked by the fact that there is absolutely no ability to predict what you're going to do. So the brain is in fact a miracle, right? The interesting thing about what I was talking about is, if you think about systems like that, there are no right or wrong answers. Right? Your brain has evolved to exist in a world where you can't predict an absolute outcome, yet it can survive in that world, it can navigate that world, and do it effortlessly almost, and brilliantly. But that does require that you understand that there isn't an absolute right and absolute wrong to every situation. You go this way, there are these effects, that could be this, and you navigate this soft space. And that's what your brain has evolved to do. Now, why do I bring it up? Because if you then look at what we do in education, we don't test for that, right? And every time we try to rebuild IQ, we did it from one principle, which is, well, I have to create a test, right? There has to be a right answer to the test. Now, I could take multiple intelligences and say, well, I'm going to make this test to be something to do with artistic qualities or spotting something aesthetic. But there's still a right answer and there's still a wrong answer. And actually, there's a bit of your brain that deals with that that's very specific, and actually it's not the most sophisticated part of it. And so what's interesting is that the very nature of the testing, the very idea of testing itself and ranking things as right and wrong, test scores, is going to inevitably lead to not capturing what the brain is doing. Because the brain essentially exists in an unpredictable universe. So what I want to do is to take you out of that world where emotions become this kind of primitive component that sadly we give into, despite having this wonderful rational brain that should be in charge, and actually turn it on its head and say, there's no real problem you can solve with a rational brain. Right? If we walk into a party, you can't rationally know who the best person to talk to is. When it's time to decide whether you're going to commit to a life partner, get married, have kids, pick that job over this job, there is no rational answer to that question. Right? And yet most of you will do very well at it. So, what is the state of education? If that's the case, what happens in the classroom? Why is it a crisis? Well, let's look at let's take that idea and see if we see it reflected. So the idea is simple. SATs are a right and wrong test. So they should correlate with IQ quite closely. True. They do. If they correlate with IQ, then there should be a huge genetic component in that. True. We know that as well. If there's a genetic component, we know that some of that correlates with all sorts of other things that we don't like socioeconomics, then we'll see those effects. And we do, right? Then what do? Well, we build league tables. So we try to get away from this unpleasant thing around individual children, so we build league tables of schools. And what we do is we rank the genetics of the incoming students in schools. That's effectively what we end up doing. And then we claim that's a good school and that's a bad school. And if you work in that school, you'll get paid less because the students aren't performing as well on these tests. That's what we do. And we link the teacher's pay to the test. So we flog the children to go through the test. We just didn't do it from above, right? We did it from underneath. Incentivize it. If you use something called a value add score, that's where you look at the results and say SAT level 1 versus level 2, 3, 4. You see something very, very different from the traditional view in the media, which is, there's this big disparity, huge league table disparities. What you see is that the top schools and the bottom schools are separated. I mean, the top 1% and the bottom 1% are separated by only an 8% swing. It's tiny. And the reason for that is school ain't doing very much in the middle of this to make you any smarter, right? Now, I'd like to build an analogy for you that actually testing kids like this and ranking kids like this is the equivalent of using their height, right? 3 reasons why I would say that. Firstly, we all grow at different times, and there's not a damn thing we can do about it. The same is true of the brain. Bits of our brain switch on at different times. Yeah? I have 2 kids, I have 6 kids, but my 2 youngest kids, right? Mimi and Toby. Toby's slower developmentally, Mimi's above the curve, Toby's below the curve. It says nothing about where they'll end up eventually, but it does mean that when they go to school, everyone thinks they're really, really different. Ironically, I don't think they're that different, they're just on different timelines. And height's the same, kids do this all the time. The second thing is that you can't control how high you're going to be, right? You can't say, I'm going to work really hard, and one day I did, actually, this is exactly how I thought I was. I was 6'3". That didn't work. So I didn't get to be 6'3". I wanted to be taller at the time, I wanted to be taller at the end, that didn't work. And the third thing is also true. Did it make any difference to my life? Well, I didn't go and play basketball, but I'm not sure I wanted to. Right? And I think there's a good analogy there, which is if you stop just talking about how IQ correlates to education, and you start talking about how it correlates to certain life outcomes, sure, there are still correlations, but they're not nearly as high. And there's plenty of wiggle room. And suddenly, what you're doing is, I've created a classroom, I've created a place where I'm going to measure your height. You can't control how you're doing, you can't control where you end up. In the end, I've given you a message that tells you this is all important, that we have this, we're all tall. That's what I said. And at the end, it doesn't matter, but by then it's often too late. People have got the message, this is their level, this is where they sit. So, if you want to be truthful about IQ, this is a single measure that covers all this intelligence measurement. We don't really know what it is. I'm beginning to get some instinct about that in the work that I do, but I'm still pretty perplexed about what IQ actually is and where it exists and what bits and components of the brain are involved in that differential. And if I don't know, I'm pretty sure that most people building SATs haven't a clue, right? It's also true that what we're doing is focusing education on things that can't change. And the interesting thing that you should also know is that employers are making a break from academic qualifications. What we're seeing is cutting-edge employers saying, these aren't great predictors of future success. I don't care whether you've got a first or a 2-2. I don't care how many A-levels you've got. This isn't helping me to work out who I should hire. And when you get that kind of rift between education and employers starting to build, you've got a real problem in hands. So, and go back to the beginning. You can ask me why there's a picture, because I don't actually explain it, and I'll leave it slightly unexplained. So, how did my work start? My work didn't start by thinking about this problem at all. It started by building a theory that I loosely termed information geometrics. What I did was I rewrote information theory, which is basically turning the world into a string of ones and zeros, into something that was a bit more chaotic. I won't go into all the details of what that maths was about, but that was from a period of time deciding I no longer wanted to be a physicist and I wanted to be into computational neuroscience. And I got jammed between 2 titans. One of them was Steve Hawking, the other was a guy called Jeff Hinton. And by bringing those 2 ideas together, I just tried something a bit radical. And what happened to me is, and why I'm not an academic, is what happened next. Right? Because what everyone was doing at that time, which is the late 90s, is AI was about one thing, and it still really is, which is I'm going to show a network a picture of cats, and then I'm going to show a network a picture of dogs, and then I'm going to ask the network, is this a cat or a dog? And I'm going to judge how good an AI system that is based on how well did it learn the difference between cats and dogs, how fast did it learn the difference between cats and dogs, how complex can I make this? Can it still pick the cat out if it's on a chair? These are the kind of things that we look at. And those are the tasks, it's very task orientated. Now what I did was go in completely opposite direction, which is to just sort of ask some really kind of almost metaphysical questions like, how does information evolve inside of neural networks? What does that kind of look like? It must be a bit like the weather, mustn't it? Like, how could you describe the patterns? How could we talk about rain and sunshine, if you like? rather than worrying about whether, what happens at the end of the process. In fact, that was the first thing that happened in my theory, is there was no end of the process, whereas everything was inputs and outputs. My thing didn't have any, which is in the first pass. So you can imagine a young academic with very few years of experience behind says, no, you guys are all going left, I want to go right. This came to a head very quickly. They said, you can't do this. You can do it on the side, but you can't do it for your day job. And whether I was being arrogant or young and brash, I don't know. I just went, stop it, I'm leaving. So I did, and I went into the oil industry and I raised some money, and I started working on the problem of data visualization, helping people find oil, and demonstrating that by actually thinking about the brain in this way, you could get real results. Now, I will be really honest and say it's taken about 20 years to get crackingly good results with it, but all along the journey there's been little wins, little wins, little wins. Something that happened 16 years in, which was amazing, was a collaboration with the MRC, where we're actually looking at the connection between the correlation of brain activity and the relationship that you feel exists in right? So this is about putting people in virtual reality environments and letting them show you how they feel things are related, and then actually showing that if you trigger them with those objects and measure all their brain waves using an FMAIT scanner, that the correlations mathematically in their brain activity relate to the correlations they feel in their thoughts. But thoughts and the underlying systems are linked as closely as that. So, what did I kind of more recently discover? So what sort of came towards the end of this time period was rebuilding psychometrics. Now, why rebuilding? Because fundamentally, you've got IQ and you've got personality. Personality, the ocean metrics, are fundamentally just built on the dictionary, right? And if you were a psychometrist and you studied for a while, you'll eventually come to the end point which says, how did they pick the first metrics that were then rationalized down to being the ocean metrics? They did it by going into the dictionary and seeing how closely related words were. And if there were lots of words that kind of meant the same thing, they must be important words, so we'll use those. And then they did maths, and then they got ocean, right? So it's based just on linguistics. So what I did was say, well, we should be, yes, linguistics is going to come up, but we should base it on neuroscience, we should base it on brain mapping. And that's exactly what I started. And this is actually a picture of the way different meta patterns within somebody's brain areas start to link together as they think. And it's from a process that's called neuromapping. This is where we get people to tell free-form stories. And we can now do linguistic analysis and remodel their brain activity back out of the way they tell stories, which is quite fun to do. And what's interesting is that what's going on inside the brain is you've got lots of specialist centers, but you've also got these things called reentrant connections, these massive parallel streams of connections that cause bits of your brain, the meta patterns that are going on inside of your neural activity, to, if you like, hop around all over the place, and finally your brain comes into sync with these spontaneous patterns. And what's quite counterintuitive is that meaning, which for us consciously is always a whole, can be fragmented off. So the relationships between heroes and villains come from a completely different bit from, say, the primitive emotions you feel like anxiety, depression, etc. And you can actually take a story apart into all of these different layers and see it isolated just in that layer. It's quite fascinating to see meaning in multiple layers, which is what you end up with. Now, ultimately, I put this image in just to try and give you an idea of what goes on in the frontal cortex. What do we see now that we're using this kind of psychometrics to rebuild these meta patterns inside the brain? Well, you've got two basic pathways that come out of your visual cortex, and actually all your auditory data and sensory data go in the same way, which is you've got a conceptual stream and a contextual stream. Yeah? A set of data about what is going on, and another set of data that goes in a completely different direction about where or how things are put together. Whole scenes versus the bits. And those two elements have to crash together in your frontal cortex, and you have to make sense of the what coming together with the where. And that's essentially what's going on in an intuitive process. My background has changed, which unfortunately the contrast has changed. Looks much nicer than the black background. Never mind. Hopefully you can just about see it. Can you see that? Is it visible? Okay. So this is a mathematical model of how thinking occurs, and actually what happens is all three bits are squished together, but I pulled them apart mathematically so you can see it. New stimulation comes in from the two streams, and it fragments your mental state. Thousands, tens of thousands of individual parts. Those move around and get together. Yeah? They collaborate and they compete. A bit like tribes, people get together in tribes and fighting each other and working out who they're going to have alliances with, until they find the right bits, if you like, to be in, and they start fusing together to form bigger and bigger groups. Now, as you start to get towards the end of the process, this is where expectations start to come in, actions are about to happen. You start to feel things. The way it happens is, things going on in the back of your brain you don't really feel, but as they start to come to the front, you start to get a sense of what's going to happen next, right? There's some emotion around that. And then once it comes to a synchrony, you get a choice. And so this process is a really parallel, really multifaceted way of things bumping into each other in all sorts of different ways. Very, very far from a linear notion of kind of processing things like symbolic manipulation. This is a picture of just how sophisticated it gets. So this is actually a picture of these are different bits of the brain. We're looking at the cross-correlations of different types of mental patterns. And this is somebody, or a group of people, thinking home insurance. Right? To give you some idea of what we're looking at. And it's about 1 trillionth of the complexity that would actually be going on here. Now, since we've sort of done this work, we probably capture about 1,000 times more detail than that. But whether this was shampoo, or whether it was, picking your life partner or your job, it's a similar kind of complexity that goes on. Massive numbers of individual circuits within your brain expressing different kinds of mental patterns, popping around. Certain correlations have to get involved, and then there's certain predictions about how that will move going forward. And if you can do this over thousands or millions of people, you start to get some really interesting information about how people come to those intuitive decisions. What is it that actually makes us pick our insurance provider? I won't get into that. So, you can also do other things. You can start measuring some of the properties, the global properties of those circuits in the brain that are getting modulated over time. So, plasticity, there are certain shifts in the amount of change in the connections that go on. And this is I drew this for one reason, I show this class for one reason. There's only 6 grams, there should be many more, but it's awfully messy. But if you take it apart, it looks like this. Right? And this is something you'll all be familiar with, because it's impossible not to be human and not be familiar with. So this modulation of all these aspects of how our brain is working, if you like, how we control the climate in our heads, comes down to this, which is the structure of a story. So narrative structure is actually built into the kind of thermostatic controls of your frontal cortex. How we develop characters, how the rising and action attention has the climax, and then the resolution to it. Now, conscious choice is a creative process every single time that we take a story world with all the characters in it, all the rules that we create for it, all of those aspects, and we basically simulate a client. Now that's another way of looking at all those crazy mental patterns, jumping all over the place of the brain, and say, no, this is a story world, and we actually let those characters run. And why do I say characters? Because what's interesting is that the more important something becomes to us, as in the more of the cortex that it grabs, the more sophisticated the properties it gets, and the more human it becomes in terms of its interpretation of our heads. I.e., it recruits more of humanity in our own heads for its purpose in the simulation, right? If you like, it's one way of looking at it. Equally, when something becomes less important, we push it down. Which gives us something very interesting, which is sometimes we elevate objects to a human status, and sometimes we diminish human being down to objects. And we do it all the time, up and down. And what's really important to us will be a very sophisticated, very grounded humanistic view of something. Yeah, even our cars can take on all sorts of emotional characteristics and personality types. And equally, when we hate and when we push societies away, when you look at things like genocide, it always starts by turning people into objects for exactly the same reason. So that is, for me, one of the most interesting things is that there is a very different intuitive mental process that is very much bound to the way our brains put together at a physiological level as a complex system, as a chaotic system in and of itself, but also it ties to things that we are so socially aware of. I can see there's another problem, which is there are no words on this slide now. White background. So I'll fill that in for you. This is just understanding just the top level. You know, I'm going to move through these slides quite quickly, but there are 3 steps actually when we make choices. Right? There's the intuitive step, which I think should be about there. Right? As we get towards the intuitive steps, we have expectations of what we need to do. We get emotions. Emotions drive us to action. These two are this is the most sophisticated, intuition. Emotion is the next most sophisticated. Rationality is just a kind of cross-checking, bookkeeping system. In fact, it's very important when it goes wrong, things get really wacky. But it's not the most sophisticated of these ways of working. Right? Just as a sort of last step in understanding personality, for instance, because what is it? We're starting with ocean and rebuilding it. So how does personality really work as opposed to classically thought about? So it's not this passive kind of propensity to feel one way or another. So one of the N of ocean, for instance, is neuroticism. As part of that describes how likely you are to feel a regressive emotion and how likely that is to be depression versus anxiety. It's like a propensity map for how you might feel about the world. Turns out that that's not a very good way of thinking about it. Better to think about personality as an active, strategic, intuitive way of dealing with the world. And there are stratas of complexity. So what we do is we dial up and dial down actively the strategies we deploy into the world. Right? The way we think about it. Are we going to be more explorative or less explorative? Are we going to be more directive or more spontaneous? Are we going to be more excitable or more introverted? Are we going to be instinctual and rapid in our responses, or are we going to dial that down and be more measured? Do we need to be rationalising more or rationalising less? And then if you go beneath that, there's stratas and stratas. So under sociable, you've got politeness versus compassion. In directed, you've got order versus industriousness. And so on. In fact, if you take it apart, there are literally hundreds of different strategic components that we put together to paint the strategy you're going to use. And how do I know that's true is a better way of looking at the world? Because if you look at traditional psychometrics and you say, how well does traditional psychometrics predict an actual behaviour? So, will you like this image over that image? It's about 10%. If you do it contextually, as in you measure these kind of active parameters in the right context, you can get up to a 90% prediction power in terms of those metrics and what somebody's actually going to choose to do. So it turns out that if you accept the personality is active and it flexes, and you start measuring that active flex, you can do a lot more. Okay, that's probably good now. So I just wanted to give you a picture of why. Right, so that's really interesting. So why marketing? Because if you work in education, you have to work within the educational doctrine, right? And the educational doctrine is to work with right and wrong answers. You can't just walk in and go, I'd really like to do some research about not using right and wrong answers. It just blocks you a lot, right? I've done some successful work as an educator in extracurricular activities where you're allowed to do it. But trying to get into the curriculum, I just got blocked. So I found another way. So it turns out that if you work with consumer marketing, what people want is results. They want to understand the intuitive steps that people take and why they take it. But now I want you to understand how something that looks trivial is really deep. So one of my successes, well, everyone's supposed to work on it. So the Grinch, did anyone see the Grinch? At least 1, 2, 3, good. Wait for the poor KTV drop. Right, so the Grinch, Christmas movie, predicted to be $75 million. Went up against Disney's Wreck-It Ralph. Big stress for the studio. How on earth do we survive Disney? Seems to be the kingpin at the moment. It's currently set to hit the $500 million mark, well exceeding expectations. And yes, it did depress Wreck-It Ralph, but Disney will never forgive me. They're just over there. So it seems that just choosing what we watch, whether we went to the Grinch or Wreck-It Ralph, right? That's not deep. That's just Silly stuff, right? So how did we do that? Well, actually, it was by understanding the depth with which people related to their children and what they wanted from the experience. It turned out that to persuade you to watch The Grinch was about getting you to feel more connected to the part of you that wanted to show your children what you have that they no longer have. As opposed to the desire, that was driven in Rector Ralph, was to join your children's world and understand them better. And if you could adequately learn to tell those stories, what we could do is prime people in the right direction. So, actually what it came down to was a really deep thing around how people make that choice. Now, the deepest experience I've had of this was working on the film Little. Well, probably most people don't know Little. So Little was an African-American female cast comedy, which was not about boyfriends. Right? And I'm stressing that because when I tried to look for a movie that was similar to it, I couldn't find anything. Right? If it's got a female cast, it should be about romance. Particularly, African Americans. There was nothing. But that's one area of distress that I had at the time as I started looking at it. But what we found was that actually, if you showed the same bit of footage to somebody who was African American, and then to somebody who was white, and they were culturally that different, right? Because obviously there's a spectrum. They could look at the same scene and they were seeing entirely different things. Right? Entirely, like we could get them reporting oppositional, completely different things by taking snippets of the movie. Yeah, one person was seeing a woman expressing her confidence, the other her anxiety. Right? Cultural difference. It's fascinating. And what we got down to the bottom of was there was all sorts of things around family structure, the level of context and communication, which is how much do I describe through my words and how much do I just expect the context to carry. So my words are less important than the gestures and the meaning of the cultural space around it. And white America, for instance, is a very low context culture. Even less than the UK, they demark everything out in the word. And African American culture is the opposite. Control. Are you deterministic? I do everything myself. Individualistic? Or do you have, is it much more communal identity? Is it much more, the idea that you're not in control of life, that life happens to you? These were the variations that we needed to understand in order to convey that movie adequately to each of those audiences. And it was amazing to be able to be working on a problem of that magnitude and the divide that was going on, because my job was essentially to get all people to watch this movie to understand, like there was some serious disjoints that you discover in that culture. And it was very interesting because I'd always been on the fence, if I'm honest. I didn't quite understand the term institutional racism, obviously where I come from. And working on that project, I walked away and go, I get it, I absolutely get it. Now I could see exactly how that worked. And it was fascinating, it was quite life-changing actually to work with. And that again was just about getting people to watch a particular movie. I did say I'd cover it briefly, which was Unsung Heroes. And I'm going to do that purely from the perspective that, because this is the researcher app and it's about publishing of papers, it was an interesting bit of work around scientists and where they publish. So you probably know this, or you might know that the standard story is of scientists. You go out and you look for something with the greatest impact factor. For instance, that was number one thing, some other things, and it's very rational. You're just going to choose on that basis. And what we discovered is that, yeah, of course, impact factor plays a role, a bit like price plays a role on a price comparison website, but it doesn't, it's not like everybody chooses the lowest priced insurance, and not everybody chooses the highest impact factor journal, or, well, there'll be one journal and one insurer, right? For whatever field or demographic you're in, and that's not how it works. It turns out something very different happens. What scientists do is that you go back down memory lane to about 8 years old, 9. Now that's an average. Some people are younger, some people are older. Where you like, I want to be a scientist. And you want to be a scientist for a reason. Some people it was the imaginative leaps that scientists took. Other people it was about the collaborating in these cool teams of clever people. Some people were about saving the world.
they had a vision of what being a scientist was about. And then what they were doing in the back of the brain was looking at people that had published in various places, the papers they read, the people they knew, how well it matched their vision of who they wanted to be seen as. Now it does come back close to impact factor because it is all about being seen in the right place in the right way. But then the way you communicate that is different. So instead of communicating about statistics of impact factor, we created these profiles around unsung heroes. People that have done things that they don't get the credit for necessarily. I always, at this point, I think about Wallace, it's the easiest to describe. Darwin gets all the recognition for evolution. Wallace gets none. But actually, all of these characters have done something that is not as well recognised. Though Berners-Lee, of course, is doing rather well at the moment. He's going to go a lot more recognition than he did at the time, so maybe not so much an unsung hero, more of a hero now, though. But the idea was that you could relate to these heroes because they epitomised those drives, and they also celebrated scientists as every scientist is an unsung hero. I think it was quite a well-performing campaign at that point, but I won't go into the stats. But it's an interesting thing to look at. Something that should be so logical and so rational to discover that actually is very intuitive in how you decide where you're going to publish. I've lost my image again. Never mind. So you might be wondering, is there, what kind of proof is there? The one thing that does exist is this system called Lemonade that uses these kind of psychometrics in the movie industry. It's been used to power 10,000 campaigns plus. And over those campaigns, that type of insight generated from these types of psychometrics has shown an 8-time lift in ROI, as in the amount of money that they spend to get money back. As in the real world, it causes people to stream music a lot more if you use this kind of insight. Those bands break more. And part of that story is Justin Bieber that if anyone wants to ask something about later. But it's interesting because it's actually the first time that anyone will be able to, I think, scientifically prove anything in marketing, right? That you can actually get this to work. So just to finish, the last slide, I just wanted to reflect on, actually I do all of that because I want to make a change in education. I want to change the philosophy of it, because at the moment where we've got to is standardised testing, worrying about teachers doing their jobs or not doing their jobs, kids getting forced through hoops, and a complete mismatch to what's going on in the world. And the world is changing because the jobs of tomorrow aren't likely to be the simple systems jobs of the past. We're not going to be sitting there building and tinkering on simple machines. As the world gets more interconnected, as you have AI, as you have all these revolutions going on, complex thinking, intuitive thinking is actually going to come back into form, which is quite interesting. But the other thing is that education is supposed to be paid for life, sure, but it's also about focusing on things you can change. If you focus on test scores, you're focusing on what you can't change very much, which seems kind of pointless to spend the first 20 years obsessing about what you can't change, as opposed to what you can. And there are so many great counterexamples. For instance, if you look at studies in elite musicians, in chess players, in areas like that, you discover that the best correlators to performance is not IQ at all. It's the number of hours of practice. Why is that important? Because if you think about it, learning how to learn those kind of skills is a base point from which you can leap. And they have nothing to do with your IQ, which is quite intriguing. They're purely environmental. Another is shaping your personality. What I mean by that is all of those ways in which you flex and choose to use your personality in different ways, there is a process of learning how to do that. What is effective for you based on, yes, there are some baseline propensities that we are born with, but there's no clear way of saying, oh, you should do it this way or this way is the best way. The better way I would put it is, if you have a sharp, jagged personality where you keep dotting around in different ways, not really seeing the problem in front of you, it's like a sharp shape, you're not very effective. If it's a nice smooth shape, but it's your shape, if you like, then it is. And the last thing I'd say that's interesting is if you think about intuitive thinking versus IQ. IQ is basically how well can you run an algorithm? How computationally, or how well can you simulate a computer? Can you manipulate symbols in a particular way? And so your ultimate goal from education becomes, can you be the ultimate algorithm walking on the planet? If you look at intuitive intelligence, it tells you something different. It says the most sophisticated form of intelligence comes when you can consider the most number of characters in their fullest most human form. So surely the most sophisticated thinker is someone who can see everything in front of them, every human being in front of them, as a whole person. And that's what we're trying to get them to learn how to do, is to stretch their capability intuitively to see the world in more human terms. And for me, I just find that such a reassuring end to a journey to say, what if education was about that? That's wonderful. That's also based on the science of what's going on in the world. I hope it was interesting. Thank you very much for listening. And I shall